There's a certain cart that rolls through Walmart every single day, and almost nobody looks at it twice. No electronics, no brand names, no flashy packaging, just plain jars, plain boxes, plain string. That's exactly why it's invisible, because we've been trained to associate value with novelty, and this cart runs on the opposite idea entirely. Somewhere in that plain, unglamorous cart is a set of choices that could keep a household running through a blackout, a shortage, or a rough winter for less than the cost of a fast food meal. The people pushing that cart are Amish families, and the items in it aren't a coincidence. They're the result of roughly 3 centuries of a community deliberately staying outside the systems most of us can't imagine living without. The power grid, the pharmacy aisle, the endless specialized products. What's strange isn't that they still buy these things. It's that almost none of us know why. I'm going to walk you through 9 of them, all under $7 each, all sitting on ordinary shelves at your nearest Walmart right now. If you like pulling back the curtain on practical knowledge that quietly disappeared from mainstream life, that's exactly what we do here at NexReveal. Subscribe if that sounds like your kind of rabbit hole, because this list is only the beginning. Let's start with the item almost nobody guesses first, plain salt. Not a gourmet finishing salt, just ordinary table or canning salt sold for pocket change. For most of human history, salt wasn't a seasoning, it was a technology. It draws moisture out of meat and vegetables, creating an environment where spoilage bacteria simply can't survive. That's the entire principle behind curing, brining, and pickling. And it's why farming civilizations for thousands of years treated salt as something close to currency. Amish households still lean on that logic today. A seller of salted, brined food doesn't care if the power goes out, because it was never relying on electricity in the first place. That's only the beginning of the pattern, because the next item works on almost the same logic from a different angle. White vinegar. A single-gallon jug, usually just a few dollars, is one of the most quietly powerful tools in an off-grid pantry. It's acidic enough to lower the pH of food past the point where most spoilage organisms can grow, which is why it's the backbone of pickling. But its usefulness doesn't stop in the kitchen. That same acidity breaks down mineral buildup and cuts grease, making it a genuinely effective all-purpose cleaner. Count how many separate bottles under your sink do jobs that one jug of vinegar could realistically replace. That's not nostalgia. It's basic chemistry, buried under decades of specialized marketing. Next is baking soda, and this is where the pattern really becomes obvious. A single box, sold for less than $1, is mildly abrasive, mildly alkaline, and non-toxic, which is why it scrubs surfaces, neutralizes odors, and even helps smother small grease fires by releasing carbon dioxide when heated. One unglamorous box doing the job of an entire cleaning aisle isn't folklore. It's why chemists still recommend it today. Here's where things start to shift from savings towards something closer to survival. Emergency candles. A box of plain paraffin candles costs next to nothing, but the physics behind them matters more than people realize. Burning a candle in a small, enclosed space genuinely does raise the ambient temperature, because combustion releases heat directly into the surrounding air. It won't replace a furnace, but concentrated in one closed room with blankets and layered clothing, a handful of candles can be the difference between an uncomfortable night and a dangerous one. The same principle behind the old advice to close off unused rooms during an outage. You're not trying to heat a house, you're trying to heat a person. This is where the story turns a bit more serious, because the next item isn't just about comfort. It's about light and warmth when the grid genuinely fails. Kerosene. A single gallon, sold in the hardware section for a few dollars, has a long, documented history as an off-grid light and heat source, dating back to when kerosene lamps largely replaced whale oil across rural America in the mid-1800s. Burned properly, a kerosene lamp produces both usable light and meaningful radiant heat, and unlike battery-powered lanterns, it doesn't quietly die the moment the batteries do. It requires care, ventilation, a stable surface, respect for the open flame. But as a low-cost, long shelf-life backup, it's one of the most practical tools an off-grid household can own. If you've made it this far, drop a comment on which of these has surprised you the most. I read them, and if forgotten practical knowledge is your thing, NexReveal has a lot more of it coming. Now let's talk about food security, because this next item is the quiet backbone of it. Canning lids. A box of standard wide-mouth lids costs just a couple of dollars, but they're the most fragile link in home food preservation. Jars and metal bands can be reused indefinitely, but the sealing compound on a flat lid is generally good for one use only. During supply chain disruptions, lids have historically become surprisingly scarce, simply because most people never think to stock them until they need them. Self-sufficient households keep a multi-year supply on hand because the weak point in any system is rarely the expensive part. It's the cheap, overlooked one everything else depends on. Which brings us to something almost anyone can start this weekend, in a kitchen you already own. Home canning doesn't require land or a root cellar. A basic canner, a case of jars, a box of lids, and some seasonal produce is enough to turn a few hours into shelf-stable food that lasts a season. It works in an apartment as easily as a farm, and the moment jars line a shelf, your household stops being entirely dependent on the next grocery run. Item number 7 is almost too simple to take seriously: plain bar soap. A basic, unscented bar costs a few dollars for a multi-pack, and the math against liquid soap isn't close. Liquid soap is mostly water, packaged in plastic, and used up far faster than people expect. A well-made bar, stored dry, lasts for months of regular use, and soap made the traditional way, from rendered fat and lye, can remain usable for decades without spoiling. In a genuine disruption, hygiene isn't a luxury. It's what stands between a household and preventable illness. The 8th item is plain cotton flour sack towels, sold in multi-packs for just a few dollars. Unlike paper towels, they're reusable almost indefinitely, drying dishes, straining liquids, covering rising dough, wrapping food, even serving as makeshift bandages in a pinch. A household can spend well over $100 a year on disposable paper towels alone. A stack of cloth towels, washed and rotated, replaces that expense for a fraction of the cost. And unlike paper, they don't vanish the moment of supply chain hiccups. And that brings us to the 9th and final item, the one with the deepest roots: plain cotton string. On its own, it seems almost too basic to matter. Tying up garden plants, hanging herbs to dry, trussing meat before cooking. But soaked in melted wax and allowed to harden, a length of cotton string becomes a genuinely functional candle wick, one that can burn for hours when set in a small dish of oil or rendered fat. This isn't a modern trick. It's essentially the same principle behind oil lamps used across cultures for thousands of years, long before kerosene or electricity existed. A few dollars of string and a block of wax can produce a dozen or more homemade emergency light sources using materials that never expire on a shelf. Here's the deeper question worth sitting with. None of these 9 items are secret. They sit in plain sight in ordinary aisles at prices most of us wouldn't think twice about. What's actually rare isn't the product. It's the knowledge of what it's capable of, knowledge that simply stopped getting passed down as convenience replaced self-reliance, one specialized product at a time. If forgotten, practical knowledge is something you want more of. That's exactly the territory NexReveal exists to explore. Subscribe, and let me know in the comments which of these 9 you're picking up first. The next deep dive is already in the works. None of this requires land, permits, or a lifestyle change. It requires a short list, a Walmart you already drive past, and a willingness to ask why something this simple ever stopped being common knowledge in the first place.